There you go. Thank you. Well, we're in Daniel chapter 7, and this is an awesome, life-changing chapter in the Bible, in my opinion. And in Daniel chapter 7, it says it's the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. What year is that in our dating system? What's the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon?
553.
553 BC is where we're at. And here Daniel has a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. He wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. It would have been cool to see more details, you know, because we just have the very gist of it, right? It would have been cool to know all the details there. What I think is awesome about this, God does intend to tell people what his plans are, right, for the future. Notice what it says in Amos chapter 3, verse 7. Amos chapter 3, verse 7. So we have this special group of people we call prophets, right? And the Bible uses different terms for it, like a seer. These are people that are specifically inspired by God and have received some type of direct message from God, either in a vision or a dream, or maybe an angel comes and actually talks with them, gives them specific information to share with people. And notice God's attitude about sharing information with us in Amos chapter 3, verse 7. What does it say there?
Surely the Lord God does nothing unless he reveals his secret to his servants, the prophets.
How important. You want to know what God is trying to communicate to us? Then we've got to read what his servants, the prophets, had written down, right? I mean, is that not the only way? That's exactly right. And if you notice, his servants, the prophets, when did God stop having prophets?
It was a 400-year period between the Old and the New Testament that it says there wasn't much going on in the way of prophecy.
That's true.
Was it Malachi?
What's that?
Was it Malachi like the last one before Jesus?
That's true. Before the New Testament, yeah, before John the Baptist started proclaiming, yeah.
Aren't we all prophets now?
Well, you know, it depends on how you define prophet, right? If it's a person who proclaims the truth, then we're all supposed to be proclaiming the truth, aren't we? Right? I think this special gift of prophecy is in the church and has been in the church and will continue to be in the church. It didn't end in the book of Revelation.
Or with E.G. White.
Or with Ellen White. That's exactly right. Notice what it says there in Ephesians chapter 4. Let's jump over to the New Testament and explore this just for a couple of minutes before we jump into the meat of Daniel chapter 7. This idea of God using specially called people, and we call them prophets. They're not always supposed to just tell the future. They have another purpose too, to help us understand God's will so that we can live a godly life.
11.
Yeah, you gonna start there in verse 11? Okay.
More than that, you just leave on.
How about 11 through 13 is really the passage.
And he himself gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, and some pastors and teachers, for the equipping of the saints, for the work of ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ, till we all come to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to a perfect man, to the measure of the stature or the fullness of Christ. So,
and that's still not the end of the sentence. The end of the sentence goes all the way down through verse 16. You know, Paul had these long sentences. So what's interesting to me, he tells us here, inspired by the Holy Spirit, that God gave some to be apostles. Do we have any apostles today?
We are.
Yeah, what's the basic definition of apostle? Okay. Lori says a missionary.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Jesse?
Isn't an apostle a person who's actually seen Jesus? Isn't that?
Yeah, that's one way where we kind of describe, you know, the original 12, right? But when we're talking about the church in our time, the word apostle means, the basic meaning is one who is sent.
One who is what?
Sent.
I believe they're more like a big evangelist.
Okay. So in the list there, we have some are, do we have evangelists today?
Yes.
Do we see any in this room? Yeah, I think so. I'm looking at one on the back row there behind Denver. Do you know that fellow there behind Denver? David Dotson. You know, evangelist is a person who is sharing the good news.
That should be
right.
Everybody.
That should be everybody, shouldn't it? It should be all of us.
You know, Pastor, one of the problems for me in that is that, for instance, Judas hanged himself. We need another apostle to replace him. Well, you know, they went through their little thing, you know, and they had to be, and they have a little list there, right, to look and see, okay, has to have seen Jesus, spent time with him, etc. And so for me, it's about the definition. And we don't even have the right words, because again, we're drinking from a dirty downstream mud puddle here in English. So what words were we even talking about back then? And do the Jews today, would they agree? Yeah, that's what I meant when I said the word apostle, because it's a different definition. I can be an apostle if I want to claim it. I certainly wasn't one of those 12.
That's
right?
true.
And so I don't want to get confused on definitions and, you know, oh, you know, we're all this or we're all that, because to me, it's a special thing to have been those 12.
That's
I don't
true.
want to take it away and say, yeah, I'm the same as them. I'm the same as Peter. Well,
I think
in some ways I am, but I'm also not. So.
Yeah, you didn't see Jesus
No.
face to face in the flesh, right?
Did Paul claim to be an apostle? He didn't.
Yes, he
He
did.
did.
Yeah, notice, I mean, he said,
saw the risen Christ.
notice in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 1, Paul, an apostle.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't matter which letter you pick, you're going to get a lot of these. Look at Galatians 1:1, Paul, an apostle. Not from men, nor through man, but
Right.
through Jesus Christ.
Well, then was it disciple that he said he wasn't? A disciple? Was that a different qualification?
But a disciple is just a follower.
That's true. That's why I think whenever we see this in Ephesians chapter 4, an apostle specifically, I think we could put the word missionary in here, like Lori said, one who is sent. And typically it's a person who's sent from their home area, because, you know, in this particular time, you didn't have a lot of people doing mass transit, right? They weren't traveling to different areas quite a bit. Most people grew up in the village they grew up in. They got married. They lived and died in that area, right? So now this apostle here is one who is sent from this area to this area, and they never go back home, right? And so it's really a missionary.
How about Revelation 21:14?
Okay, will you read it for us, Robert?
It says, "And the wall of the city has 12 foundations, and in them the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb."
And that's not one of me. My name's not one of those.
Right. And we know,
An apostle, that apostle.
yeah, and we know when it says the 12 apostles of the Lamb, we know it's talking about the original 12 disciples, right?
Except for Judas.
Except for Judas.
It becomes a real problem.
Robert, where was that?
Who's the 12th one?
Revelation 21,
Yeah.
verse 4.
I think it should be Paul.
It's Paul. It's Paul.
I mean, that's my opinion.
14.
If I'm voting, that's my vote.
Yeah, there you go.
You know, when we talk about there's a time period and then a prophet, time period and a
Yep,
prophet.
yep.
And the last prophet was out of wine.
That's true.
So that's it, that's true, okay.
Yeah.
Make sure.
Yeah. So I'm going to put that on the board, what Mark mentioned there. What I wanted to bring up here in this passage is that we have missionaries today, we have evangelists today, we have pastors today, and we have teachers today, right? So why would we then try to say in the middle of this verse in Ephesians 4:11, we don't have prophets anymore? Right? Notice the purpose of this group of people: for the equipping of the saints for the work of the ministry, right? So what's my job? To equip you're the saints, for the work of the ministry. My job is to equip you for the work of the ministry, right? Verse 13, till we all come to the unity of the faith. So are we all unified? No. These gifts are still in the church. As a matter of fact, Notice what it says in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 7. Paul, I'm laughing about myself because sometimes I get 1st and 2nd Corinthians mixed up, you know. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 7. Notice what it says there. We're in the middle of a sentence again. He starts there in verse 4. I think my God always concerning you. So he's talking to the church in Corinth, a Greek city. And he says to them in verse 7, so that you come short in no gift. Right? So it was expected to have all these gifts in that church. Right? Then somebody will say, well, that was biblical times. We're not in biblical times anymore. Well, there is some truth to that, right? We're not living in the times the Bible was written. But can we still have prophets today? Right?
It's interesting on that spiritual gift list, you know, when you take that spiritual gift test, how that is right up there. And you think, what?
Yeah, exactly. And we can go to 1 Corinthians chapter 12, 1 Corinthians chapter 14, and we can do a study on prophets. What I'd like to do is put up the list that Mark referred to. So we're going to use this. Malachi chapter 3 and verse 6 is the principle of what we're going to show on the board. Who has Malachi 3:6?
For I am Lord, I do not change. Therefore, you are not consumed, O sons of Jacob.
All right, so you sit on the back row, you got to use your preaching voice, right? So I, the Lord, do not change, okay? Isn't it awesome that you have a God that doesn't change on you? Can you imagine working for somebody who day to day is not consistent and changes their mind? You never know if you're doing what they want you to do, what's right, what's wrong, but God isn't that way. He doesn't change. Jesse.
It always confuses me when it says that the Lord doesn't change, because it seems like he's had to change all the time throughout history to change the way he does things to people, because the people themselves are changing. So like he would just open up the earth and swallow hundreds of people back in the Old Testament, and he doesn't do that anymore. So
I disagree. You don't think he does that today?
Well, I've never seen it happen.
Well, just because you don't see it.
You don't live in San Francisco.
Yeah. I think it's possible, right? I mean, God doesn't change. So let's look at some time prophecies here in the Bible. So I'm going to start with Abraham. You know, he was a prophet, right? In Genesis chapter 15 and verse 13, he gives a prophecy of a time period, 400 years of captivity for his people, right? And at the end of the time period, you had multiple different prophets pop up, but Moses is kind of the primary one that we think about. So we have a prophet, a time period, and a prophet, right? Okay. Let's look at another time period. Let's jump forward in time and let's use Jeremiah. And in Jeremiah chapter 25, verse 11 and 29, verse 10, he gives a prophecy of 70 years of captivity for his people, which took place from 605 BC to 536 BC. And at the end of this time period, you have multiple prophets. Who popped up at the end of this time period? Who was a new prophet that wasn't there before? I mean, Daniel obviously was there. Who else?
Ezekiel?
No, Ezekiel, he was already there. Who comes up after this? What?
Josiah?
Right? Who's Haggai's? There's another prophet that went with Haggai, right?
Amos.
Who was the other prophet that was with Haggai? That has a book in the Bible?
Jonah?
No.
Zechariah.
Yes, thank you. Brother Bill, Zechariah. All right? So it's interesting how you have this prophet time period, and at the end of the time period, you have a prophet, right? Okay, so we'll test this. Daniel, in Daniel chapter 9, and starting at verse 24 through 27, he has the 490-year prophecy, right, of the 70 weeks. And what year does the 490-year prophecy start?
75 AD.
No?
457.
457. 457 BC. Remember from the decree to rebuild Jerusalem, right? Until the coming, that's in verse 25. And then we go to the end of this. The end of this is 34 AD. That's when Stephen was stoned and the gospel goes to the Gentiles. Okay? So notice, didn't we have various New Testament prophets pop up here? Jesus, Paul, various New Testament prophets. We had a lot show up, didn't we? Right? And so we're gonna do one more here. Can you all see that? This is okay. Here we go. Daniel, in Daniel chapter 8, verse 14, and this is the longest time prophecy in the Bible. 2,300 years, started in the same time, same year. Starts in the same year as the 490, and it ended in 1844. So here's my question. God doesn't change, right, Jesse? Right? He has the same character, right? He has the same way of approaching us as humans, right? And he tells us, here's the principle. Prophet, time period, at the end of the time period of prophet. Prophet, time period, at the end of the time period of prophet. Prophet, time period, at the end of the time period of prophet. Prophet, time period, at the end of the time period, a prophet, right?
And there were a lot of apostles too at that time.
That's exactly right.
Like the five sisters and
So,
Smith. You got those Smith.
so here we go. Mark's got a good point. You know, there were multiple people that popped up at the end, toward the end of this time period,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The devil knew that a true prophet of God was going to appear.
Joseph Smith,
And so he put a lot of false prophets there, right?
a lot.
That impact us even today. Joseph Smith is one of them, right? With the
Mary Baker.
Mormon church. Yeah, Mary Baker. How about the Fox sisters with spiritualism?
Yeah.
How about Darwin
Marx.
with evolution?
Yeah.
How about Marx with communism?
Yeah.
All these things came up around that time period. Because the devil knew there's going to be a true prophet of God. He was trying to prevent us from receiving the message that God wanted us to have. Right? So I think it's pretty cool. Here we have in Daniel chapter 7, just like him receiving visions and dreams, she also had visions and dreams, and she wrote them down. We have her writings today. We can see that it's really cool how God used her to help this church become God's end time movement. It's awesome. If you really want to be blessed, pick up one of her books and start reading.
Any of us.
And she had a third grade education.
Yeah.
Right?
Robert?
In Joel, it talks about your young daughter will prophesy.
Yes, yes. So,
So it's more than heaven,
exactly.
there'll be more prophets.
Right. So this is the last time prophecy in the Bible before the second coming, right? So we don't know when the second coming is going to happen over here. We don't know what period of time between 1844 and the second coming. But Joel chapter 2 tells us that there are going to be other people. God's going to pour out His Spirit, and they're going to be specially called people to prophesy like the other prophets of old. Sure. Right? Isn't that cool? I think it's awesome. So, when we look at Daniel chapter 7, Daniel's called by God to share truths about the future from his date. So here we have in Daniel 7, he spoke and he saw in night, vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. Now, what does water represent in prophecy?
People.
Okay, how do we know that?
There's a text.
Revelation 13.
So let's look at these rules for interpreting prophecy, right? The first one is sea or water equals people.
Is it 13, Revelation 13?
Revelation chapter 17 and verse 15 is where it's at. Notice what it says there in Revelation 17:15. We use the same thing today, don't we? You ever been to a, I don't know, professional baseball game, and remember how they used to do the wave, right? You can see them on television. They can show the camera goes around, right? But you can see it coming. And you're supposed to stand up and do this whenever it's your turn. You know, it looks like a wave is going around. And we say, look at that. That's a sea of people, right? We do the same thing today, don't we? It's not unusual to say this. Revelation 17:15, what does it say there?
Then he said to me, the waters which you saw, where the harlot sits, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues.
There are multiple different verses in the Bible that kind of bring up this idea of sea representing people. That's probably the clearest one, in my opinion. But if you want to look up some, it's all through the Bible. Let's look up a couple of others, if you don't mind. Could somebody get Psalm 65, verse 7? Isaiah 17, verse 12. And we can see that it's also there in the Old Testament. Who has Psalm 65, verse 7?
You do still the noise of the seas, the noise of their waves, and the tumult of the peoples.
See how it relates the sea, the water with the people. How about Isaiah 17, verse 12?
Woe to the multitude of many people who make a noise like the roar of the seas, and to the rushing nations that make a rushing like the rushing of mighty waters.
So we see this concept all throughout the Bible, from the Old Testament to the book of Revelation, that the sea represents people. Anybody, any questions about that? Okay. All right. And then it says, four great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. So now the next thing is, let's understand what a beast represents, right? What does a beast in prophecy represent?
Nation.
Okay. Nation. I'll say political entity. All right. Do we have a verse to back that up?
Someone Revelation, probably.
We'll learn it, Pastor. You tell it to us.
How about in the book of Daniel?
Oh, dang.
Wouldn't that be awesome to have one in Daniel chapter 7? Notice what it says there in Daniel chapter 7 and verse 17. And we'll do verse 23 just for the fun of it. Since we have Dan with us today from Washington, D.C., we'll have some fun here and we'll do verse 23 as well. Who has Daniel 7, 17 and 23?
These great beasts, which are four kings, which shall arise out of the earth. And then 23. As he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms.
So we could say kingdoms here too, right? Is that nation, political entity, kingdom, government? Everybody okay with that? Okay. So we have four great beasts that came up from the sea. We have four nations or countries that came up from populated area. Everybody okay with that? Okay. All right. Now verse 4. Let's say, I wouldn't mind if Bill Cody read this one. Daniel 7, verse 4.
First was like the lion. It had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off and it was lifted from the ground. So it stood on 2 feet like a man, and the heart of a man was given to it.
Okay, can I erase this on the board?
Yes.
How do we know who this first beast is? Well,
Aren't these the same as Nebuchadnezzar? I mean,
okay, I like what Steve said there. If you look in Daniel chapter 2, right, the head of gold represented what? Babylon. So if God is telling us the framework for prophecy, he's given us this framework in Daniel 2, why would we not start with what he's already given us, right? So in Daniel chapter 7, this first beast represents Babylon.
Pastor,
Okay.
something that's interesting is that their symbol, Babylonian symbol, was a lion with wings.
That's exactly
And
right.
God used their very own symbol to represent that.
Yeah, exactly. You can do this. You can search right now. Look at the bricks they have found in Babylon, and notice what's on what image is on the bricks made. Look at because they've excavated Babylon, ancient Babylon, and if you look at the bricks when they put it together, what does it show?
A lion with wings.
It shows a lion with wings. That's exactly right.
Something else that they pointed out was that the lion was the king of the beast and the eagle was the king of the air, and that Babylon represented powerful. It was all powerful, but the eagle was powerful also, but he covered a huge territory. So it covered territory, and I thought that was very neat.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes sense, doesn't it,
Yeah.
for them to use that. Notice in Jeremiah, let's look at a couple of verses to kind of back us up here. Jeremiah, of course, lived during the time of Babylon, and he was there in 605 BC whenever the Babylonians came and captured Jerusalem. So when I look at some of the verses in Jeremiah, how he refers to Babylon, notice Jeremiah 4:7 says, "The lion has come up from his thicket, and the destroyer of nations is not his way. He has gone forth from his place to make your land desolate. Your cities will be laid waste without inhabitant." So he's declaring in Judah and proclaiming in Jerusalem, and he's saying this to his people, the Babylonians are coming. This is before it happened. And notice how he refers to the Babylonians as a lion in Jeremiah 4:7. All right. I don't know. Steve is not convinced, so let's do a few more. Is that okay? Okay. How about Jeremiah chapter 50, verse 17? I need somebody to read that, please, in Jeremiah 50, verse 17.
Israel is like a scattered sheep. The lions have driven him away. First the king of Assyria devoured him. Now at last this Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, has broken his bones.
What does verse, since you're there in chapter 50, what does verses 43 and 44 say?
did Jeremiah prophesy that before it happened?
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
said Nebuchadnezzar was going to come and get us?
No, I think 50 already took place.
The king of Babylon has heard the report about them, and his hands grow feeble. Anguish has taken hold of him, pangs as of a woman in childbirth. Behold, he shall come up like a lion from the floodplain of the Jordan against the dwelling place of the strong. But I will make them suddenly run away from her. And who is that a chosen man that I may appoint over her? Or who is like me? Who will arraign me? And who is that shepherd who will withstand me?
So we have Jeremiah, you saw in chapter 4, before it happened, he talks about Babylon coming. And then Jeremiah chapter 50, we talk about how Nebuchadnezzar and his army had already besieged and taken Jerusalem, what was going to happen to Babylon. So we see all through the writings of Jeremiah, he uses this idea of the Babylonians being called a lion, right? So we have So we're not making something up here when we say the lion represents Babylon, because that's what was known in the ancient world. As Wanda mentioned, if you look at and some of you may have already Googled it and brought up when the archaeological people came through and excavated Babylon, and they saw winged lions, right? It's pretty cool how accurate the Bible is. So here we go. Anybody have any questions about the first was like a lion and had eagle's wings? Yes, Scott.
Not a question. Lamentations 4:19.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, will you read that one?
It says, our first.
Now, I want you to know that Jeremiah wrote Lamentations. So what does it say in 4:19?
Our persecutors are swifter than the eagles of the heaven. They pursued us upon the mountains. They laid wait for us in the wilderness. So you put those two images together and you have that.
What's the reference?
Winged,
Lamentations 4:19.
winged lion.
He's talking about how the Babylonians are swift, and he's referred to as the lion. I mean, as the eagle's wings.
Yeah.
This is Deuteronomy 28:49. So this is Moses, right? This is 600 plus years before Nebuchadnezzar and his dad and Nabopolassar, okay? Right? Listen to what he says. The Lord will bring a nation against you from afar, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flies, a nation whose language you will not understand. And that's if they fall away and don't obey what God has told them to do in the writings of Moses, then God would send this nation. And we know now that it's talking about Babylon. But I think it's interesting how Moses uses this idea of eagles, just like Jeremiah did in Jeremiah chapter 4:19. So I think what Jeremiah has done, he's using the same terminology from the writings of Moses about the nation of Babylon. So we can see without a shadow of a doubt, this characteristics of this first beast fit the Babylonian nation to a T. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And there's a similarity here with the actual life of Nebuchadnezzar, right? Because didn't he become a beast, right? And then after he became a beast, he was converted and he became a man. And so there is, I think, this type of symbolism taking place from Daniel chapter 4 in relationship to Nebuchadnezzar representing the Babylonian Empire.
There was a second interpretation of that too, that it was at the end of the Babylonian, how Belshazzar became weak and became like a man.
And that's exactly what happened, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we know, because we've already studied it, right? In the previous chapter, in chapter 5, how Belshazzar, it says that his knees were knocking together. He was so scared, right? Right. And I think it is referring to how they became weak. That's something we see throughout history and, of course, in the Bible. Whenever these nations degrade themselves even more in debauchery and licentiousness, and and they start falling apart from the inside out, they become weak and they're conquered by somebody else. So, any questions about verse 4 of Daniel chapter 7 being Babylonian Empire? Okay. So we know it's Babylon, and we need to know the dates. Because when we get down to verse 9 and 10, we're going to have to know the dates. So tell me what dates to put down for this empire.
553.
60. Okay, we'll start with 605 BC, right? That's when Nebuchadnezzar became king. And when were they defeated by the next empire?
Right?
Belshazzar. Was it, 5?
In October.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, October 539 BC,
October 12.
right? They were defeated by another nation. And so that leads us to the next verse. Somebody read verse 5, if you don't mind. I have somebody read 7:5.
7.
And suddenly another beast, a second, like a bear. It was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to it, arise, devour much flesh.
So who did the chest and arms of silver represent in the statue?
Medes and Persians.
Okay. I'll put Medes and Persians. Who was the nation that conquered the Babylonians? And we know this because we've already studied this in Daniel chapter 5, right? The Medes and the Persians. They conquered the Babylonian Empire. In what year? 539 BC will start. Go ahead and give me how long they last.
Not very long.
7 years.
Well, 33.
30 years?
331 BC. They were defeated by the next empire. So it's really easier. Once we establish who the first one is, it's easier to see who the next empires are because we just follow history, don't we?
Right.
So remember, Daniel chapter 7, he sees this vision in the year 553 BC, right? So notice we're 14 years before they're conquered by the Medes and the Persians. And now he's looking all the way down to the destruction of the Persian Empire. And verse 5 says that this looked like a bear. Notice how it says he's raised up on one side. How many arms do we have in the statue?
2.
2 arms, right? How many sides do we have to the bear?
2.
2 sides. So we're seeing this idea of Medes and Persians, right?
And
One side is higher than the other because
Persian.
essentially the Medes and the Persians became just the Persian Empire, right? The Medes were just kind of assimilated and absorbed into the Persian Empire and became known as the Persian Empire. And it had 3 ribs in its mouth. What's interesting about this, when you remember back in Daniel chapter 6,
3 nations.
it says in verse 1 and 2, it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be over the whole kingdom. This is after they conquered the Babylonians. Over these, 3 governors. So we see this idea that they conquered 3 provinces, 3 areas, right? They conquered Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt. Right? So those 3 ribs represent the provinces or areas that they conquered. And so it's interesting how they use 3 ribs. So they conquered those 3 main areas, right, of the known civilized world at the time. And so we have the 3 ribs representing the areas that they conquered as Persians. And it says they arise, devour much. And that's exactly what happened. After this, in verse 6, I looked, and there was another like a leopard. I can remember how to spell it. So in Daniel chapter 2, what was next on the statue?
The waist,
Chest.
The belly and thigh.
The belly and thighs, and that represented, so we had gold, silver, bronze, just like the Olympics. And it represents Greece. And here it's shown as a leopard. Okay? And they started in 331 BC because they defeated the Persians. right? Some of you maybe have watched some of the extremely violent movies about how the Greeks,
Alexander the Great.
yeah, with Alexander the Great, right? Of course, they had been fighting, the Greeks and the Persians had been fighting before Alexander the Great came along for well over 100 years, right? What was the movie, The 300? Who is the, did y'all see that? Who's the king of the Persians in the movie 300? Xerxes, right? Right? The husband of who?
Esther.
Esther. It's Esther's husband you're looking at there. They portray him in a really radical way, don't they, in that movie? And so we see the Persians and the Greeks, they've been fighting for well over a century. But when Alexander the Great comes along, he has a unique way of organizing his men. He only had 35,000 men fighting against a much larger army of the Persians in Issus and defeated them. And you can go visit that piece of land there where they had this major battle. It's interesting how Alexander the Great, he didn't lead from the rear like most generals do. He led from the front. So maybe he didn't get killed. But essentially, what happened on this battle, this is really pretty cool. You have the Mediterranean Sea here, right? And you had this river, and the Persians were here. And over here was a mountain, and then you had the Greeks here. And the Greeks attacked the Persians this way, even though they had an army a third of the size of the Persians, because they attacked them in such a way, like a pincer movement. We think of the Germans who made this famous, but really Alexander the Great came up with this movement and defeated the Persians. He outflanked them. Really pretty cool. In 331 BC is when the battle took place. So we see this leopard had on its back 4 wings of a bird. So if 2 wings means it's swift, what does 4 wings mean?
Swift.
Extra swift.
Yeah. Alexander the Great, he started, he defeated the Persians in 331, and Alexander the Great died in 323.
Yeah.
And he conquered the then known world in that short period of time. Right? He was just radical. He went all the way to India. And then his men said, we've conquered enough. Yeah. Right? Let's take a break. Let's enjoy the spoils of what we've won, our victories. And he goes back to Babylon and makes Babylon his capital. It's interesting how he does that. The city of Babylon.
Pastor, I wondered why Persia. If Persia didn't. This was the most spectacular thing in the whole world, was this city. Why they didn't take it over and use it as their capital. But the next country did pick it up. So.
Well, I think Darius used it as his capital. Right?
I don't know.
Yeah. And so, it was funny how they were split, right? The Medes at first were the strong part, and then they became weak and just absorbed into the Persian Empire.
So do you think that when the Persians took over, when Cyrus took over or Darius, you say Darius is when it made the capital?
Darius was the
in
uncle.
Babylon.
He was the Mede, but Cyrus was the Persian. Right, he actually was the general that led the army to conquer Babylon. That's what it says in Isaiah chapter 44 and 45. Over 150 years before the event happened, he was called out by name in the Bible as, you're the general that's going to be the one who defeats Babylon. By name. And even told how he's going to do it. Right?
So you think after they conquered Babylon, that the person was Cyrus, took off first. You think he did not stay in Babylon?
No, he didn't. I think he took his army and went out conquering other places while his uncle, who was Darius, took over and made the capital out from Babylon, the city of Babylon. Right. And so now Alexander the Great goes back, and in 323 BC, he's still a young man. He didn't even have a son yet. I think he was 33 years old when he died.
That's what happens when you fight in the front.
He in 323, how he died was it was alcohol. The truth, people say we have a few Greek historians that write about this, and they don't know what to call it, but they're guessing he had malaria.
Yeah.
Right, and that he got really drunk one night, and I guess it was so much alcohol that his body couldn't handle both the malaria and the alcohol, and he passed away. So,
And I guess the malaria kills you, though, doesn't it? In most cases.
yeah, I think it could, right? I think being a young man, if he had drunk plenty of water and he didn't consume the alcohol,
You may have lived, yeah.
His immune system was already compromised.
the immune system's already
Drinking that much alcohol is not gonna help.
Yeah, exactly. So in 331 BC, they're conquered by the Greeks, and then the Greeks then conquer the known world all the way up to India and go back and relax in Babylon. It says after 323 BC, what happens to the leopard? How many heads does the leopard have?
4.
4 heads. So whenever Alexander the Great died,
His 4 generals took over.
he died in 323 BC. When he died, his 4 generals then started, because he didn't have a son, right? His wife was pregnant, and
He was born after he died.
he was born after he died, and then eventually they killed the son.
Pastor, I read somewhere that Alexander said, they said, who's going to take over? And he said, you can go to the strongest.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
he was
He didn't really leave a
egging
legacy.
him on to
Yeah,
fight that out.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, Lysimachus, Cassander, Ptolemy, you have to check my spelling there, and Seleucus.
I'm okay.
Seleucus. I'm sure I've misspelled something there. Those are the 4 generals that were vying and struggling for the power. Ptolemy, his line controlled Egypt. And Seleucus, his line controlled the Middle East. Let's see, Cassander and Lysimachus, you're going to have to look it up to confirm. One of these controlled Greece and one of them controlled Turkey or Asia Minor. And I can't remember which is which. Anybody want to help me on that?
So they're the 4 heads.
One of these guys was Egypt. One of these guys controlled Asia Minor.
Somebody gets kicked out.
Well,
Asia Minor.
what's that?
Your top guy is Asia Minor.
And we call Asia Minor Turkey today primarily, and this was then Macedonia, Greece, in that area. So that's how the empire was divided up. What's interesting about Daniel chapter 7, when we look at this verse, it's so accurate. It's talking about how this particular beast was going to be divided up into the 4 heads, which I think is so cool. What do you guys think? How accurate the Bible is there. Okay, we'll do a little confirmation here before we go on to the next beast. Let's verify that we're on track with the Medes and the Persians in Greece. Let's verify, okay? In Daniel chapter 8, and we won't get into the details yet, we have another parallel prophecy given in Daniel chapter 8, where instead of using beasts of prey, they use beasts from the sanctuary service, because that's the focus of Daniel chapter 8. And in these particular beasts, which parallels Daniel 7, which parallels Daniel 2, notice what these 2 beasts represent in Daniel chapter 8. Look at Daniel 8, verse 20. What's it say? What's the first beast representing in Daniel 8:20?
The ram.
What does the ram represent in Daniel 8:20?
Median Persian.
Read
The
Persian.
kings, yeah, Medes and Persians.
The Medes and the Persians. What does the next beast represent in Daniel chapter 8, verse 21?
Greece.
It represents Greece.
Yeah.
And notice it even talks about Alexander the Great there in Daniel chapter 8. So I want you to see that we're not making anything up. We're right on track with what the Bible itself says. Isn't that cool? I just think Daniel 7 is life-changing because you can see how accurate the Bible is. And it's a book we can trust. So, this is so accurate that the pagans said it had to be written after the fact.
Yeah.
There's no way that you can predict. I mean, Daniel's in 553 BC, and he's predicting something that happens after 331 BC. Over 200 years later. How could somebody do that? The pagans are like...
Just the pagans, is the people today, some of the religious people
today. I know, you're right about that. So the pagans said, there's no way. They had to be written after the fact. Well, what's interesting about this is we have, because of archaeology and this Bedouin boy who threw the rock into a cave, we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, right, found in the 1940s when they started finding the Dead Sea Scrolls. And guess what? We found a copy of the book of Daniel written over 150 years before the time of Jesus.
Well, but it wasn't written before 331.
It was not.
So we don't. So I mean, they can still use that if they want.
But as you saw in the prophecy I erased, the book of Daniel predicted the timing of the Messiah. How could it do that if it was written, before the fact? That's what the pagans said, right? It predicted the year that the Messiah would be baptized, 27 AD, and predicted the year he'd die on the cross for our sins, 31 AD. And they're like, what? These are first century pagans that say, how in the world could this happen? This is impossible. They didn't believe in miracles. They didn't believe this was inspired by God. But now we know from the Dead Sea Scrolls, way before the time of Jesus, right?
Pastor, it's the same thing like today where Ron Wyatt has shown the crossing of the Red Sea, Mount Sinai, and Sodom and Gomorrah. All of this that the Bible has said. There's really no ground to stand on that people that say, oh, the Bible's not true. I mean, here it is in living color.
In living color, amen. So we're going to stop here in Greece. We're kind of run out of time, but I don't know if you want to take a picture of the board. We're going to pick it up from there next time. I'm not going to rewrite all the things you see on the board next time. So we're going to focus on the next beast that appears. But at least we made it this far in Daniel chapter 7 today. I think we're making progress. Denver?
So Babylon is modern day Iraq, and Persia is modern day Iran. What was modern day Medes? Do you know? That Iran too?
Yeah, they were absorbed into the Persian Empire, so I would say Iran. All right, we'll close in prayer. Father in heaven, praise you and thank you for showing us these wonderful truths from the Word of God, how accurate the Bible is, how we can put our trust in the Word of God, and we thank you for sharing things ahead of time to show that you know the end from the beginning, that we can put our trust in you. And so we do that today, and we thank you for this privilege in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Happy Sabbath. Thanks for coming to Sabbath school. I'm glad you guys joined us online. Have a great rest of the day.
Bye.